Well, this is also depressing and serious. Maybe we should rather talk about wine. I thought I'd kick off by asking who here likes to drink wine? And I'm so happy I'm not alone. Well, there's a reason for saying this, and that is, can I get my presentation up here? And that is because I started a wine club here in Washington, D.C. to bring South African wine that's not available. And last year, it's not for profit thing, so no one makes money, we just do it for fun. But last year, we couldn't get our wine out of the port of Cape Town. It sat on the quay for 2 months. Fortunately, it was winter, so it didn't get hot. Eventually, we had to fly it out. And the question is, why? Why did that happen? Well, there are two answers to this, and you've heard both of them already today. The first answer is energy, or rather a lack of electricity. The second answer is corruption, which is a major part of the reason for the lack of electricity. South Africa is the most industrialized country in Africa. So it's not on the list of fragile states. But when you look at the map of fragile states, they have things in common. One of them is that the people don't have access to energy. The second is that they all have a lot of energy in fossil fuels and other means in their countries available. The third is that their people go hungry. And the fourth is that they all have a problem with corruption. And if you look at Africa, the youngest continent on earth, by its people, not by its earth, that is certainly, to many of us, a really great concern, but it should be a concern to everyone. Because the United States and Europe and Canada are pouring aid into Africa. It's not helping, it's not working. Well, part of the reason is because, oh, there it is, would you believe that? Part of the reason for that is that, let's just catch up. Fragile states. Part of the reason for that is what is sometimes referred to as the trilemma of energy. On the one hand, everyone wants energy security, enough energy for personal and commercial use. On the other hand, everyone wants energy equity. In other words, that everyone has access to energy. But the US, the West, Europe and the US and Canada are focused on the third item, which is environmental sustainability. And therefore, all these countries in Africa with cheap energy in the ground cannot access it because they cannot finance it. Instead, as happened now again at COP28, they are offered loans to buy expensive renewable energy developments manufactured by China. So the US is lending money to African countries to buy products from China for energy that firstly does not help them to industrialize because you can't build a mine based on solar energy, and secondly, that they can produce more cheaply locally. You look at Gabon, you look at the DRC, you look at countries across Africa, and they all have abundant gas and coal and other fossil fuels in the ground. They also have sun and hydro and geothermal available. It doesn't mean that no one wants a cleaner environment. What it means is, for Africa, the focus is on the two things on which the West doesn't focus. And they are not interested on the one thing that the West is interested in. And therefore, the outcome is actually quite simple. Deprivation. Because people are deprived of energy, they are also deprived of food. They go hungry. This means that you can't develop commercial agriculture across Africa. But in South Africa, where there's a thriving commercial agricultural environment, highly competitive, this poor chap at the bottom, his name is Chris Kitter, he runs the largest poultry operation in South Africa and in Africa. He has been profitable for 23 years until last year. He has just announced the first loss in 23 years. Why is that? Well, it has to do with this chap. He's the Minister of Electricity. In South Africa, we have an abundance of ministers and a lack of electricity. Because we have a Minister of Energy, we have a Minister of State-owned enterprises that runs the electricity utility, and we have a Minister of Electricity, but we do not have electricity. In fact, if you look at what's going on in South Africa, over the last 2 years, collectively, we've lost 11,000 hours of electricity. In fact, this would be funny if it weren't so annoying. The most advanced part of the electricity situation in South Africa right now is that you can load an app on your phone so that you can see when you will have electricity and when you won't in your suburb. Now, the real question is, what must be done? Why did this happen? Why did the most advanced industrial country end up in this position? Well, firstly, it ended up in this position because the state-owned enterprise was subject to what was known as state capture. It's another word for corruption. There was a state capture commission. This is all documented. You can look it up. It's available. It's freely available. You can see who was corrupt. Many of them are still in government. Unless corruption is changed, in other words, unless we have rule of law, the supply chain is not going to change because electricity is broken. But more than that, the ports, the transport system, the entire supply chain in South Africa has been interrupted by corruption. And therefore, if you want to help African countries, and I'm using South Africa as an example because you may not notice it from my accent, but I was born there. If you look at South Africa, and you look at the rest of Africa, where supply chains are even less developed, and you look at all the minerals that are vital for the West, even for those who think that the world's about to end due to climate change. These things can only be procured if these actions are taken. We need to support Africa to make the most of its own resources. Why would you allow China to build coal-fired power stations unfettered, but you won't allow them in Africa where people actually need the power to develop, or gas, or any of the other local resources? If you look at the development, it's very clear that market solutions should be encouraged. The governments have failed. The idea that because government's involved, poor people will have access to anything, has been disproven decisively. So therefore, you need market solutions. You need institutions. It's impossible to have rule of law without decent institutions. So if you want to sort out the supply problem or the supply chain problem in South Africa, you need the rule of law problem to be solved first. Agriculture and mining are the two things in Africa that should be leading the way in terms of economic sectors. The US, Europe, and Canada should be focusing on agriculture and mining by supporting rule of law and by ensuring that cheap energy is produced where it exists for those who need it, right next door. To come to my wine story, we have a new shipment planned for this year. We hope it'll arrive sometime next year, because none of these problems have been solved, and we're still thirsty. Thank you so much for giving me your time.